Hi, I'm Tom Lippincott, and welcome to another episode of Modern Jazz Noise. In the next couple of episodes, we're going to be discussing a couple of new acquisitions of mine from the company Red Panda. Today's episode is going to be on one of my favorite pedals of recent times, the Tensor. Going to be exploring some of the really cool things that this pedal can do, and to be honest, I've just barely scratched the surface. The next episode after this one is also going to be a Red Panda pedal. Here's a sneak preview. It's going to be the Red Panda Radius pedal, which is another one that's got some really cool, exciting new kind of sounds. Let's go ahead and jump into the Tensor. So here we are in a pedal board view. You can see the Tensor right here, and of course the one that we're going to look at next video is the Radius over here, but we won't get to that this time. And right now I have everything on the pedal board completely off, so you're just going to hear my completely unaffected guitar tone. And that, of course, is my Conklin 8-string. You're seeing the headstock there. And it's plugged directly into a Vox-style amp sim in Logic. Now I'm going to turn on a few sweetening pedals, a little bit of compression, and a little bit of this EP booster, which isn't really boosting, it's just adding a little bit of extra EQ sweetening. I'm going to add some reverb and delay, just to actually I'll show you what the delay. Unless you're listening in a silent room or through headphones, you might not even be able to hear that that's, well, here I'll bring a little bit of it up. I've got, I don't think it's on camera, but there's a expression pedal that I can use to raise the level of the delay. Okay, and then I'm going to add in the Big Sky a little bit, and you'll notice that the preset actually says Bloom. For any of you who have watched my previous videos, the ones where I was pontificating about reverb, you know, there's no better reverb than the Lexicon LXP1, and that one of the reasons I like the Big Sky is that I was able to get a pretty good emulation of the LXP1, which is there. But I've actually created this other preset that I've been liking a lot lately, which is using the Bloom. I guess the idea with the Bloom setting, or the Bloom algorithm, is that it's designed specifically to stay in the background and not interfere with the dry sound. And I've been finding that's pretty good. I've been using this as much on gigs as I use the LXP1 setting these days, and I've been really liking it. So that's my kind of, you know, basic, what I might not like a straight ahead jazz tone, but more like a pop kind of jazz tone, or like, for example, the intro to Neil Young's tune, Don't Let It Bring You Down. That's one of the tunes I do pretty regularly. So something like that I might use this kind of tone for. And that's the kind of stuff that I would typically use a lot more effects on anyway. So that's what I'm going to be using for this video to demonstrate the Tensor. All right, so to start off with, I've heard people use the Tensor before just to get these really wild, crazy, sort of granular delay, freak out, you know, mayhem kind of things, and I thought, oh, that'd be a really cool thing to have. And as a matter of fact, what happened was Red Panda was having a sale, and I'd been wanting to get the Radius for a while, and when I was getting that, I thought, well, okay, I can get the Tensor on sale as well, since I've been kind of curious about that, and check it out. And boy, I really love the Tensor to death. I mean, it's great. It does so much more than I was expecting. So anyway, to start off with, the first thing I want to talk about is using the Tensor as a looper. Now, it's not going to be the kind of looper that excels at tempo-based loops, you know, that I think I've talked about this before on this channel, and I may talk about it in detail on another episode, but the idea of sort of two different ways to use looping. One is and this is how most people, I get the impression, tend to use it, is tempo-based stuff, where, let's say, basically I lay down a rhythm guitar part on a loop and then loop it and then solo over it or play a melody over it or whatever. So I'm basically just using it to, create instant overdubbing. But different musical parts that where the time is, important, that it stays in tempo and whatever. But what I tend to use loops for on this pedal board is more textural or kind of psychedelic based loops that are, atmospheric. And those generally are not dependent on time. I'm not laying down a chord progression or, a rhythm or anything like that. I'm just laying down like little fairy dust kind of stuff. And the looper in the Tensor works great, but it's probably not the best one for tempo-based looping. It also has the limitation of, I think it's about 9 seconds of loop time, so that's not enough time to input an entire song, let's say, unless it's a really short one. But if you want to do textural-based stuff, it's actually pretty good. And I've been using my microcosm as a looper for the most part, but now I've realized as an alternate option, I can always use this. So that's the first thing I'm going to demonstrate here, is just using the Tensor as a straight-up looper. So just looking at the controls here across the top, I have speed, time, pitch, and then blend, and random. So I've got the random set all the way to 0 because I don't want any of the mayhem, the random stuff for this particular use. Notice that I got the blend on 50%, which means you can hear my dry signal perfectly well, but you can also hear the wet signal coming out of the pedal just as loud. This control is an interesting one that's kind of unique to the Tensor, which I'll talk about in a minute. But first, I want to again get back into just the basic looping idea. I'm going to turn on the pedal, which is that blue light. Now you see it's on. Now in this particular mode, I've got it set direction is forward, alternate, or reverse. Alternating the middle setting just means whatever you put in here is going to alternate between forward and reverse every other time, basically. So I've just got it set to forward, straightforward. This hold switch is set to over, which is overdub mode. Again, that's going to be your very typical loop-based kind of mode. When I hit this switch, it's going to start recording a loop. So I'll go ahead and hit it and start playing something here. I tried to kind of make that a time-based loop. So it's just playing back what I played into it, and of course I can play something over it. It's not overdubbing right now. If I want to overdub, I can press the switch again and the light turns red. And now it's back to just playing back mode. Again, pretty straightforward stuff. Now, I just moved the blend knob to 0, or to all the way dry, basically. I did that instead of turning off the on switch, because on a normal looper, if I turned the on switch to off, it would just stop the loop, and then I could turn it back on to start the loop, right? Well, I guess because this pedal was not necessarily designed for being used as a traditional looper, let's see what happens if I'll turn it back to 50%. Now I'm going to hit off. Okay, and now, oh, my loop is gone. I've got to record a new loop now. So if I hit the loop off switch, it automatically erases the loop. So that's one of the limitations of this, even though it can do, plenty of overdubbing and so forth. And I'll try another loop here. Okay, so now I'll turn the level down a little bit, and then I'm going to overdub something over it. okay. All stuff that we've, heard other loopers be able to do pretty well. And of course, what if I want to make it go backwards? Hit that switch and now everything's backwards. And just like with a lot of other loopers, now I can overdub something. Now, that last layer that I overdubbed, since I switched everything back to forward, is that last layer is the only one that's backwards, and the original ones are back to being forward. Just the way, most normal loopers would work. Okay, that's all cool. Now, let's take a look at this switch for a second. Check out what happens if I turn this down. So it's basically a speed knob, and they specifically designed this. The idea was so that it could sort of mimic a tape slowing down, because if you go all the way to the middle, it's off. It's just like a tape or an LP slowing down to nothing. And, okay, you're like, okay, that's only half the range, but if I go the other direction, it'll do it backwards. Now it's the original speed, but everything's in reverse. Now, what happens if it's in this reverse mode and I switch it over to this reverse mode? Nothing. Oh no, I take it back. It's gonna negate this reverse. So it's kind of interesting how those controls interact with each other. Now, I was messing around with this and thinking, okay, what if I wanted to bring the loop, let's say up an octave or down an octave or whatever. It's kind of hard to do that with this thing because you have to kind of get, it's this analog-y kind of... I can't even really find where that octave is. So it's kind of not very easy to use in that respect. However, we've also got these the pitch knob here, and watch what happens. So it goes up, the pitch goes up in increments as I move this knob, but the speed also changes. Which is what I want. Usually I want the effect of a sped up tape. So it's real easy actually to go up an octave just by doing that. And I can even go up 2 octaves if I go all the way. 2 octaves, 1 octave, and I forget what there's a few other intervals in the middle here. I think there's a 4th and a 5th in there. And then if I go down, it'll just do the same thing but going downward. And again, the pitch and the speed will alter. Now it's 2 octaves below, or 1 octave below. And let's say that I said, oh, well, I want it to be an octave lower, but I don't want it to be half as slow. I still want it to be, the same speed. I can change this time knob, and that actually speeds up and slows things down without affecting the pitch. So now okay, now I've got it set to 2 octaves, triple speed, but if I move the time knob all the way down, it'll be really super high in pitch, but still fairly slow. And of course, you can hear there's a lot of glitchiness now, which is cool. That's, it's one of those positive uses of low fidelity, I guess you could say. Okay, so there's actually, even though it's not really meant to be a looper per se, I don't think. They don't really market it as that, at least that's not why I bought it. It's actually, a pretty fully functional textural looper. Again, probably not what you want if you're gonna, record a bass part and then a chords and then sing on top of it or whatever. and do a whole tune that way. But if you're doing this, you know, funky textural stuff, it works great for that. What about the other modes on this switch? Because I had it on overdub. Let's see, let's do a new loop here. Okay, now I'm going to move it over to the record. What that's going to do is it's just going to, when I record a new layer, it's going to erase the current layer. I can still play on top of that. But the minute I hit this button, so it's basically just a monophonic looper, you know, in this particular setting. And then lastly, if I put it on next and record a loop, let's say. So what it's doing there is it's playing the loop that I just recorded once and then automatically overdubbing. It keeps the loop length the same, but it automatically records the next thing. So it's basically just functioning like a delay with a really long delay time in this setting, with a regeneration set to 0, right? So it only repeats once. And that could be handy, like what I was doing there. It was almost like I was playing a round, you know, with myself. Not a round, but a round, you know, like row, row, row your boat. Okay, so anyway, could do all that cool stuff, and this is without even getting into why I got this thing in the first place. The second thing that it can do, which is also, again, not why I bought it, but it could be a really cool thing, and that's simply pitch shifting. I can, let's start by turning the blend knob all the way wet. Now I've got myself an octave pitch shifter. Or a fifth. That's kind of hard to tell, but if I mix the dry signal in. Guess it doesn't do so well with really complex chords. But still, it works, you know, just about as well as a basic pitch shifter. So I could also, there's a fifth down. And of course I can always put a little more in the background. Effects there. So another kind of cool pitch related thing that I can do, though, I move the pitch back to center, so it's at the normal pitch, but I'm all the way over into wet still. And I can use the speed knob to affect the pitch as well. Now, as the lower the pitch gets, the more of a delay that I get. I don't know how useful that would be, but you know, for some really weird sound or something. However, what if I just make the pitch a little bit lower? Yeah, I'll put it over to like this maybe. Mix in the dry signal. In a pinch, I've got myself a fake chorus. Now you will notice that there's this weird bum, 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 bum that happens, like a pulse. So I probably wouldn't want to use that on a regular basis as, you know, a main sound or whatever, because it's a little distracting. But still, I thought it was really cool. That's yet, you know, another kind of interesting sound you can get out of this that I don't know if it was really meant to do. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about with the Tensor is reverse, like actually playing backwards. And you may remember, if you watched my video where I talked about the rewind delay pedal, you know, I sometimes will use that in reverse delay mode with the dry all the way off to mimic the effect of a backwards guitar, you know, like during a solo or whatever. And one thing that this does is that same idea, except it actually works a little bit better, I found. Because with this delay, I would have to mess with the level on the pedal, and sometimes I wouldn't get the level match between the backwards and the forwards, and if I'm switching back and forth between the two, there would be like a little volume change. Anyway, it's much easier to seamlessly go back and forth between frontwards and backwards on the Tensor. So if I set it, let's see, to the blend is at 100, speed 0, and then I'll add a little overdrive here. So I really love how seamless that it back and forth is. I can kind of play a little duet with myself, in effect, you know, a backwards phrase and then a frontwards phrase. And you may notice that when I got to the end of a backwards phrase, if I sustain a note and then switch it off, that note, of course, is still sustaining when it goes back to dry. So it's a pretty, you can't even really tell where I'm switching from forward to backward and vice versa. So I love this pedal for that particular effect. And it also means that I don't have to get rid of another echo that I may be using. You know, let's say I've got a real echoey, I'm doing something like this. So that I ended with a forward chord. I just switched the thing off while the chord was sustaining, and it was hard. You couldn't even really tell when it switched from backwards to forward. So anyway, that's such a cool thing. Okay, so now let's say also I'm playing some backwards stuff and I decide I want to loop it. Now I've got a backwards loop going. I can always put the blend back and play forward along with it. Or if I go to this, let's see. Okay, I went to alternate mode, and that means every other time when the loop plays, it'll be forward and then backward, backward, going back and forth. Backwards now. And then of course I can manipulate the so it's pretty fun to play around with stuff like that. So in other words, even if I'm in the middle of playing a solo and playing some of that backwards stuff, I can just in the spur of the moment decide, hey, I'll make this into a loop and screw around with the loop a little bit. So that's kind of a cool thing that, you know, I wouldn't be able to do with another pedal. Finally, we come to the main event, the main reason why I wanted to get this pedal in the first place, and you know, what I think this pedal is most known for. Notice that we have not yet once touched this random control, and this is where the magic really happens in this pedal. So what that basically does is anything that you've got going on in the pedal, if you turn the random up, it basically says, okay, all these settings we're going to randomize. So for example, let's say I have the pitch set, I don't know, to an octave up, maybe. And with the effect off, I'm just playing some normal stuff. Yeah, I'll just play a pentatonic scale like that. And kind of loop it. And then put the pedal on. If I turn the random all the way up, it gets even more crazy. Now, I haven't really, you know, been able to figure out exactly how all this stuff interacts, but it does seem like how you have these knobs set will affect what happens when you turn the random knob up. So for example, if I have the pitch right in the middle here so that it, you know, it normally would just be normal, then I set things to random, let's see. So now it's mostly just switching back and forth between forwards and reverse and kind of glitching, but not much is happening with the pitch. And that setting can actually come in handy if you want to have some of this crazy randomness happen, but you're actually playing over a chord progression. Let's say, you know, I'm playing. Yeah, I'm playing this chord progression. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It sometimes switches at weird times, but it's still, you know, in the ballpark enough so you get a little bit of weirdness, but it still is going to stay in the key that you're in, let's say, and, you know, follow the chord change that you're playing. Whereas if I change the pitch a lot, I'll get a bunch of random kind of pitch changes and stuff. So I was still playing the exact same chord progression, but you could hear a lot more sort of chords that were switching to other keys and so forth. And again, sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. Let's say that I'll make myself a little loop here on my, let's see, something along these lines. Maybe this. Reverse the loop. Okay, I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds with the loop, but let's say that was what I started with, and I'm going to, you know, this is going to be something I'm going to play over. I'm going to solo over this. switched on the Tensor, I had the pitch set to 0, and it pretty much stayed in. I'm playing in E minor, or I switched to E Dorian, or E Mixolydian, kind of like a dominant sound there halfway through, but it just followed me, you know, it stayed with me. Now let's say I want to get a little bit more crazy and random. So there, I just overdubbed a little bit of the Tensor stuff I was doing into the loop, because I've got this looper is set up at the very end of the chain. It's even after my reverb, so if I want to get some cool backwards reverb, I can do that too. Like, let's say, I'll demonstrate that a little bit here. Switch it back to normal. It's I guess it's kind of hard to hear now because the loop is dense enough that it's kind of taking up a lot of space. Here, I'll try a new loop and try that. Something like that. So I'm basically getting, you know, reverse stereo reverb, because I'm going stereo out of the big sky into stereo in here, stereo out of here into the, in this case, my DAW. But anyway, a little sidetrack there. But the way all these things now can interact with each other, there's some really cool stuff. Another thing that you might have noticed me doing at one point was I had the loop going here, and I was playing over it and doing all the mayhem with the Tensor. And then I turned the loop off and kind of let the Tensor do its thing for a little bit. And it was kind of a nice different texture without the bottom dropping out. Because that's one thing that is kind of can be a downside to this textural looping thing. Let me start a new loop again here. Now notice that I have it set to reverse with this button. Now if I record a loop, it'll automatically start playing back reverse. You can kind of hear that backwards reverb better now. It's a really cool effect. I've always loved that. Okay, so now normally, you know, if I'm playing stuff against this, one thing I have noticed is, you know, if I have a real spacey kind of loop going on like this, it makes the stuff that I'm playing in real time sound kind of small. You know, if let's say I go back to my regular reverb sound, like if you hear that just by itself, oh yeah, it sounds real ambient and kind of cool. But then you hear it against this huge sound. All of a sudden that sounds super tiny. So what I have to do is switch to a different preset on the reverb that's actually got a much more reverb, and then I'm also bringing up the delay. Now, I turn the looper off, even though I've got this real spacey big sound. I turn the loop off and it's just like, oh, the bottom dropped out. It just sounds so empty all of a sudden. It's kind of distracting. However, if I'm playing with the Tensor, doing some crazy stuff with it, it's a much more seamless transition. That's what I was looking for. You know, when we went from full-on space and huge end of the universe to just a regular guitar, it's not such a jarring change from one to the other. So that's basically it. Okay, so anyway, again, Tensor, 10 out of 10. You know, this is one of the coolest pedals I've gotten in a long time, and it's got so much potential, and I love the sort of random mayhem that it gets, the end of the, you know, the stuff I demonstrate at the end here, where you never quite know what you're going to get. I love that when pedals do that. They can have a mind of their own, and you know, it's the HAL 9000 saying, sorry Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that, and doing its own thing.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Now, as long as it's not going to, you know, make me die in outer space, I'm good with it. As long as it does something random, it'll probably be something cooler than what I would have thought of. So anyway, I love that, but I also love the fact that you can control this thing, and you know, you can, depending on how you set it and how you use it, you can be a little more in control as well. So that's a really cool aspect of it too. I'll play it out. Maybe a little bit of more stuff with the Tensor.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
So that's going to do it for Modern Jazz Noise for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the Tensor and how I've been using it, and hope everybody out there is enjoying these videos and getting something out of them. I wish you all the best for your future noise-making endeavors.
And don't forget to
like and subscribe.